I call the Assembly Finance Committee meeting for November 29th to order. Ms. Spiegel, will you call roll?
Thank you, Chair Wall. We have all Assembly members present in chambers.
Thank you. That brings us to approval of minutes. Any changes or objections to the November 1st Finance Committee meeting? Seeing none, those minutes are approved, which brings us to agenda topics. We are going to be adding one agenda topic after our budget update. We'll be talking about sales tax holiday ordinance, so just wanted to note that on the agenda. Any other changes to the agenda? Seeing none, I will hand it over to staff to talk us through the budget update.
Thank you, Chair Wall. Good evening. Welcome to our mid-year budget update. We're going to look at FY23 as we're rounding that out, closing up our books, talk about where we are in 24, and then set the stage for some ongoing discussion about 25. I'm not going to read through each of the memos, but I am going to have Ms. Spiegel put up the PowerPoint so you guys can, perfect, follow along with that. So one of the interesting things about budget preparation is we do it so early from when we actually live through things. So I think particularly looking at our FY23 budget, it's important to remember where you were when this was being built. So April of 2022. We were still in a pandemic. We started kind of figuring out what the word endemic meant. As a city and borough, we were handing out COVID test kits out of the cash office and other locations. We hadn't even seen a full cruise ship coming out of the pandemic. And we were 4 months away from the Ironman competition even being in place. So if you think about where you were when you were building the 23 budget, so much has happened since then. So we were very cautious, or you were very cautious as you built your budget, and I think we've seen some great performance coming out of it. So what I wanted to do tonight is walk you through when you were building the budget, these were the assumptions that you were working with. So this is page 13 of the packet. That's also up there. So in April, when you were considering the budget, we had, in last April, so in April 23, so move forward a year from when you built the budget, when you were looking at 24, we were making forecasts about the end of 23. So last April, partway through FY23, we had gone through the contract negotiations with our bargaining units. So we adjusted our forecast for those wage and benefit increases. You can see that you had several requests come through that had been approved as supplemental appropriations. You can also see, starting at row 224, there were a lot of revenue anticipations that we were already realizing in April of 2023. So we had found out that the state was going to reimburse for the school bond construction debt, which was $16 million coming in. We had ARPA funds. We were already seeing strong sales tax numbers. So above the budget last April, Mr. Rogers was forecasting nearly $7 million above what was budgeted for sales tax. And you can see a myriad of other revenue streams that were forecasted moving into your planning for 24. So as you built the budget last spring for 24 and you were forecasting what FY23 would look like, we thought we would have about an $18 million surplus, and we thought we would end the year with about a $28 million unrestricted fund balance. So let's move into what we know now. So we can go to the next slide. And what I tried to do on this slide is highlight in yellow the things that changed. So from what you knew in April to what we know today, We had some additional expenditures, a couple highlighted in yellow there. We also had some lapses, which just means that we spent less than we budgeted. And I'm going to come back and talk a little more about the non-personnel services, which is $2 million, which is larger than we've seen in certainly recent history and going back several years, larger than we noted in a long time. And then over $5 million in personnel services. We're going to come back to that as well. You can see that our sales tax ended up being another $4 million above what was anticipated when the budget was built. So it was $11 million instead of 6.9. Investment income, we ended up booking $2.6 million in investment income. And if you'll remember how volatile that year was, no one was feeling great about budgeting really anything for investment income. So our investment portfolio really had a much better year than anybody anticipated. We saw our department revenues, so whether that's permits or fees or program participation registration fees, grow larger than anybody anticipated. Again, coming out of COVID, there was just great response and a lot of activity within our departments. And you can see a few other things. We had a transit grant was less than we anticipated. We had some PILT revenue more than we anticipated. I'll just say a quick note about line number 249, that property tax deferral. It's an important accounting, technical, housekeeping thing. We can talk about it more offline if you like, but it has to do with when people are paying their property taxes. So you'll see that it reduces our revenue here, but it's put back in the next year. So just wanted to call that out. So as we are wrapping up FY23, at the bottom, you'll see that our surplus went from 18 to more like 31 million, and our unrestricted fund balance went from an expected 28 when you were looking at the budget last cycle to 41 million in unrestricted fund balance. So it's definitely a significant jump. However, don't get too excited. We're going to talk a little bit more about other needs and things as well. Any questions on that before we get into the personnel and the non-personnel? Okay. Yes.
Thanks, Ms. Fleck. This is great. Could you just talk a little bit more about the department program receipts above estimates, just because that's a fairly large number? So you had said like permits and fees.
Permits, fees, any of the anywhere where a resident would be paying for a service. So like people getting building permits or registering for volleyball or swim lessons or any of those other department specific kind of fees and revenue sources.
Okay, thanks.
Any other questions? Mayor Weldon?
Just a follow up on that, is that because we were still thinking COVID and people weren't going to the gyms and we weren't having our recreational programs, and then we became an endemic portion? And
my assumption is yes. I didn't build that budget, so if anybody has any other comments, but yes, we were we were still COVID minded, didn't know how many people would come back out. You have something you'd like to add?
I think that's exactly right. I think preparing the FY23 budget, we were ultra conservative in our revenue forecast, right? We didn't know how many people were going to come back to the ice rink or participate in swim lessons. And we just really didn't anticipate operations returning to normal as quickly as they did post-COVID.
Mayor Weldon?
then on the personnel lapse, so this was for FY 2023. Have we filled some of those positions hopefully in 2024?
I don't have a count of how many positions are filled and vacant at this point, but I will say that, there's been a lot of good actions by Assembly and by the staff that have help us recruit people and retain them. In the last year, you all have approved paid parental leave. We have a deferred match, we have a match for deferred compensation for those employees who are in a defined contribution retirement plan. And then from a systems perspective, our HR department got NeoGov up and going, which is a great recruitment tool for us. It gets our jobs out in the same spaces as the state's jobs. We've got some direct links to Indeed. And I just know from finances recruitments, we've seen better pools of candidates and larger pools of candidates since we've gone to NeoGov. So I don't have exact numbers for you. I can come back with some information, but I think we still have a long way to go in filling positions, but we are, I think, making progress. Okay.
Roland.
Well, staying on the personnel theme, we'll go to the next slide, which is page 15 in your packet. And looking at FY23, this is just looking at dollars, not positions. 4 departments make up about 75% of our salary savings or personnel lapse. And you can see that police is about 1.5 million, engineering and public works 1.1. We know we had a lot of vacancies in capital transit. Again, still trying to fill those positions, and also in project managers. The fire department had 825,000, and then Parks and Rec had just over $500,000. And finance, not far behind, had another $500,000 as well. So a handful of departments making up the majority of that savings. And then if we look at non-personnel, we had approximately $2 million of savings there. And there's about $1.5 million of it that we can point to very specific projects that didn't happen, or areas of savings. So we know that with our junked vehicles program and recycling, we're limited in vendors in the city to get work done there. We've got a couple of projects that just didn't get started. The comprehensive plan, the River Road vehicle cleanup. We did see some great just savings in streets and maintenance, spending less on items needed to keep the roads safe, and also some contract savings. And utility savings is interesting. As we looked around multiple departments, there wasn't like one department that had massive savings, but everybody had a little bit here and there. So 10,000 savings there, 20,000 savings there, just kind of spattered around where departments would be budgeting for utilities. And then about $100,000 in transit supplies and parts of savings. Yes, Ms. Kester.
Mayor Weldon has a question.
Sure, I'm just saying for the record, the $450,000 in savings from the recycling is halfway to the car crusher. Just wanted to note that.
Ms. Kester.
To the street department horn really quickly on the savings of $240,000. Over $200,000 of that is because our new street superintendent is purchasing salt in a new way, bulk salt instead of bag salt, and was able to realize those savings. So innovation from our employees.
Other questions on personnel or non-personnel lapses from FY23? I've got one. When I saw this originally, my assumption was that this was probably related to us not having personnel. Like if you don't have personnel, you can't spend as much. But I guess I'm hearing maybe that that's not true, that these are just kind of specific savings or projects that didn't happen and are not limited by our own capacity.
I believe there's probably a mix of that, Chair Wall, particularly with the comprehensive plan, that CDD hasn't had the staff to tackle that. And so that is one that is definitely related to staff. But certainly others of these are just related to various other reasons.
Mr. Bryson?
Thank you, Madam Chair. While I'm excited that there's savings, I didn't want to see the River Road vehicle cleanup still on there. Is that project slated to be coming back in fiscal year 24? So we saved it in 23 so that we can do that project in 24?
So right now there are some logistical challenges with the River Road cleanup, legal and logistical challenges that have really required us to put our thinking caps on. If the body would like an update on that, we can certainly bring that to you at a later time.
Ms. Hale?
Thank you, Madam Chair. Can anybody speak to the recycling household hazardous waste junk vehicles lapse? Just what's up there?
Yeah. I'll take a stab at it, though I would like the opportunity to dig a little deeper with Recycle Works. We do have limited capacity in our junk vehicle program because of our contractor and their capacity. We entered into a new contract for hazardous waste this year. So certainly we'll dig into that a little bit more, but capacity, that is an area where staff capacity is an issue, or contractor capacity is an issue rather than staff capacity.
And I will add just a little to that. I know that with the FY23 budget, as Recycle Works was headed into negotiations, they budgeted more of a worst case scenario and were able to negotiate some lower contracts. So some of that savings is realized just through their contract negotiations.
Ms. Flake, is that all you had on FY23?
That is all of FY23, yes.
Any other questions from the committee on FY23? All right, FY24.
So FY24 is off to a great start. Obviously, we had a very strong tourist season that started in July. Well, the fiscal year started in July. One of the things I wanted to point out to you is we're going to do an update on revenue, but the expenditure side of a forecast will come with our budget discussion. As part of our budget process, we do ask our departments to kind of true up their budgets. What are they actually expending? What are they actually experiencing with inflation? What are they able to get done? So the expenditure side of our conversation will come as we start talking about budgets in April. But I do want to touch on where we are. So we can go to the next slide. This is page number 18. So we've only had a couple of supplemental appropriations come to you thus far. We are already seeing sales tax above the budgeted amount. And again, remember, it was a year ago. We had seen a partial cruise ship season, but really we've seen a combination of things. Inflation certainly has an effect on our sales tax, but then also a really strong, robust tourist season this summer also work towards that. The second line that you see under the revenue, it's actually line 375, is that property tax deferral coming back. So I said it was an adjustment. It went away in 23. It's back in 24 as we expect to collect that revenue in 24. And then just a few other things going on with our property tax true-up and our community assistance award above estimates. One of the tools that has traditionally been used by CPJ is anticipating a savings, and that's traditionally been $1 million, so we've left that in our forecast. I do want to point out to you, in your 24 adopted budget, you have about $18.5 million in one-time spending, and that included $10 million for City Hall, $3 million to go into the restricted budget reserve, $2 million towards the JPD radio system, $2 million in general fund support for Bartlett, and then about $1.5 million in assembly community grants. So those are all one-time expenditures that are included in your FY24 budget. one of the things that I want to just touch on while we're looking at this screen, because it still has your $31 million in unrestricted fund balance, is to take a moment to remember that fund balances are there for a good purpose. We should use them for one-time projects and expenditures rather than ongoing type expenditures. It's a good use of a fund balance to take care of efforts that we're going to have to do anyway. So as we think about where we might need to put resources to, if we're going to have to do work anyway, that might be a good use of our fund balance. And also we like to use our fund balance for anything that might reduce our operating expenses going forward. So I've included what you've already put into your one-time budget as far as one-time expenditures. I just wanted to make you aware of some other things that we're hearing about. We're not making decisions on this today, but just other one-time expenditures that you may see coming your way. We're about $1 million underfunded in our restricted budget reserve. We know that we've got grants coming down the line that are going to need matching sources. And so I expect that we'll see some requests for that. In an upcoming committee of the whole, I believe you'll be talking about office space. There may be one-time needs associated with any leased office space changes. There's also been discussion about the JPD radio system project and if that would require more funding, affordable housing projects that are floating around. And then we have a whole list of other maintenance and capital needs that are out there. So as we're looking at the fact that we're anticipating a $31 million unrestricted fund balance at the end of FY24, there are certainly a lot of needs. As staff and the city manager's office, vet different requests before they ever make to you. Just know that there's a lot of things going on around there, and we should definitely use our fund balance for one-time type expenditures.
Thank you, Ms. Flick. Mayor Weldon.
Thank you for that, Ms. Flick. Do we have any idea if we got every single grant, how much match that would be? Or is it too staggered that we would get, I'm just throwing numbers out there. We're applying for a 20 million grant this year. We might get in 30 next year. I'm hopeful that we might get grants. So just any idea of how much?
I'll go ahead and take a stab at that one. I do not know how much that might be because the grant opportunities kind of pop up on a rolling basis. We have a grant tracker that the Engineering and Public Works Department keeps, and I believe it was presented at the last Public Works and Facilities Committee meeting. So from that, we could get a good idea of like pending requests that are out there. But I mean, for example, I'm going to be bringing you a request for match money that we've already committed to by non-binding resolution for the RAISE grant for Juneau North Douglas Crossing. That's about $1 million that we'll be requesting. Certainly we have grants out there for, Lemon Creek path that are in the hundreds of thousands of dollars. So, it definitely adds up as we throw spaghetti at the wall to try to get to all those opportunities. But I will, before the retreat, take a look at that grant tracker to try to at least give you an idea of what we have in the queue. Anything that's really significant, like the RAISE grant, we would bring to you guys and make sure we don't soft commit, because of course you have to accept the funds, so you don't have to accept a grant. But anything for those big dollar amounts we would bring to you before we apply for a grant.
Ms. Hale.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Thank you, Ms. Flick. I can't remember exactly how you said this, or if you'd said it, or if it was a separate conversation that I had. But when we're talking about sorting out one-time funding better, so that one-time funding can come out of fund balance rather than impact the budget, would, for example, that $1 million to match the North Douglas Crossing grant, would that be a one-time cost out of the fund balance rather than as part of our normal budget? And maybe I'm speaking about this wrong, and I will do my soliloquy on fund balance later, but I I won't go there now.
Thank you, Assemblymember Hale. In your example, yes, if we need to apply a match to a grant that's covering a project, so we get the money, we get the grant once, we need to make the match once, that certainly would be a one-time expenditure. One of the things that I'm going to work really hard this budget development season is to really clarify as we work through department budgets what are one-time expenditures, what are ongoing expenditures, because I'd like to be able to present a very clear picture to you about ongoing revenues that you need to support those ongoing expenditures. And so as you're looking at your revenue sources and you're looking at the things that you can count on year after year, you can use those to fund the operations that need to happen year after year. And then look at fund balance or one-time revenues for those one-off events. So whether it be we need to buy a thing once, or we need to match a grant once, then you could draw from your fund balance to do that.
Other questions on FY24? I've got one. $1 million lapse in personnel. How realistic is that for FY24? Is there a way to get a handle on that?
Ms. Wall, I would like to be able to have a better handle on that as we walk into the budget cycle. As part of our forecasting, we'll look at what we should have spent in personnel and what we've actually spent in personnel. We can look at our numbers and how recruitments are going, how we think that we're going to wrap up the year. So we will have a better forecast number walking into the budget cycle.
For Bryson?
Thank you, Madam Chair. I thought that Mr. Rogers last year gave us a talk that he did not want to overestimate sales tax. And I thought we had a discussion that he wanted it to only be like $1 million above the previous year. He was really concerned about overestimating sales tax because he thought there might have been some indicators that were going to like maybe harm or, prevent the growth that we saw. What might have changed that we have now a $6 million increase when he was really concerned about overestimating by $1 million? At least that was my recollection of where he was trying to target.
Assemblymember Bryson, I think that inflation is a big driver of that revenue cost growth, because as your base receipts increase, you're having to buy products for a larger cost due to inflation. That sales tax is also then increasing. That's likely not the only driver, but that certainly is a big one. And we've seen large inflation in this past year, in the past few months, certainly. So while we're talking about sales tax, if we can go to the next slide, I just wanted to quickly show you our Q1 actual revenue as it relates to sales type taxes. And you can see that we're relatively strong overall. Sales tax for the Q1 is roughly $500,000. These are all in millions of dollars. Sorry, I left the key off of that. We're about $500,000 above our budget for the Q1. I would not anticipate that kind of variance in the winter months. So I would expect that to be closer to budget as we're going into the winter months. The one surprise was that the hotel tax was softer than our budget. We'll just kind of keep an eye on that and see what's going on. Not sure if that's hotel prices coming down. I don't know that we've had a volume decrease, but we'll keep an eye on that as we move through the year. One of the other things that I'd just like to say about FY24 is I think that we've reached the end. I'm a little afraid to say this, but I think we've reached the end of anomalous one-time revenue sources falling on CVJ. So I think one of the the great things from a forecasting perspective is we can go back to kind of those tried and true, look at history, look at a few economic variations that might be going on, and get more precise about our forecasting. It was really hard for anybody to do accurate forecasting during the pandemic, where you had anomalous behavior, tons of money coming from the feds, from the state. Just it made it really, really hard to guess what was happening with different, spikes and retreats of the COVID disease. So I'm excited that it looks like the very large one-time swings in our revenue and expenditures are hopefully going away, and we can get back to more incremental type changes.
Mayor Weldon.
I like that manna from heaven. And I apologize, I should have asked you this sooner, so if you don't know, that's fine. On the sales tax, so that Q1 is our big cruise ship season, how much would you guess percentage-wise is cruise ships and how much is locals buying stuff, or is that, and if you want to come back with that, because I should have asked you that beforehand, that's fine.
I am definitely going to have to come back with an answer on that one. I don't know that off the top of my head. But we can find that out.
Before we move into FY25, I just wanted to orient the committee to the red folder item. Hopefully you had a chance to look at it, but if not, it's okay. Talking to staff, we thought it would be helpful to frame the budget discussion that we'll have at the retreat, recognizing that, our job budget-wise at the retreat will be to provide some direction to staff so they can prepare the budget. We had a conversation about what kind of questions they want to hear discussion on, and so those are here. And so I just want you to keep these in mind as you prepare for the retreat. And we'll talk about some of them here on the next few slides. So I'll send it back over to staff.
All right, so we will start looking into FY25, and what we wanted to be able to present to you is basically if we went into a room and built a budget without any direction, what would we come up with? So just take it as, we needed to make some assumptions. If we were looking, forward, what would we put together? And really through the retreat and the red folder item that's got questions and the assumptions about what we've made, we're looking for your direction. So on the next slide, I just really felt like I had to put in a huge disclaimer. This is page 21. This is completely for discussion purposes. You've not given staff instruction. We are not building or approving in a budget today, but we did want to put some assumptions out there of some things that we're looking at and what we might want to do after you give us some direction. So we'll move into those assumptions. Inflation's been a tricky one. This year has been particularly challenged with respect to inflation. We are starting to see a slowing of inflation. We're not anywhere near where the feds want us to be. We're not sure what they're going to do with interest rates, depending on who you talk to. They're going to hike the rates more because they want to get to a 2%, and other people are saying, no, they're actually going to cut rates because they were too aggressive. We're going to have to wait and see what the feds do on the rates. But it's important to note that inflation has a lot of impacts in our budget. It obviously affects a lot of our commodities, our supplies, our services, but it also affects our sales tax revenue. So for purposes of building a budget, we assumed a 3.5% inflation rate, and that would impact, like I said, the sales tax and supplies and services and other things. So we did 3.5 for sales tax, and we did 3.7 for other kinds of services. Just again, trying to be a little conservative on the revenue. As far as tourism, which drives both a lot of our costs but a lot of our revenue, we're anticipating that to be relatively flat. Looking at the cruise ship numbers from summer 23 to summer 24, there's not expected to be a lot of difference. Independent travel has still been strong. Centennial Hall's open. So just from a looking forward, we anticipate that tourism is going to be relatively flat. So the tax type revenues that come and are driven by tourism, we took that into consideration. Our salaries and benefits are a large portion of our expenditure budget. We are entering the third year of our agreements, and so those include a 2% wage increase, so that has been included. And we're projecting about a 5% increase to the employer portion of health benefits. That's what projections that we've seen and what we've seen in the industry and what we are anticipating. I'm going to come back to property assessments. I do want to touch on general receipts. We talked about that earlier. We assume that people will continue to participate, and we'll see a small growth, 2.5% growth in general programmatic revenues. And then, as has been the practice, we've included $1 million as a lapse, a savings, if you will. We wanted to put together a structurally balanced budget that's going back to Ms. Hale's question, that's operating revenues are covering our ongoing expenditures. So think about your salaries, your day-to-day supplies of things going. And so if we go to the next slide, this puts numbers with everything that we just talked about. If we look at so whenever we start the budget, I'll just start at the top here, and then I'll come back to property tax. So we take our FY24 year-end projection, that's line 383. We take out our one-time expenditures and our one-time revenue from FY24, because we assume they were one-time in 24, won't happen again in 25. You can see the sales tax growth, the other revenue growth, negotiated wage increases, health benefits, merit increases and other personnel actions. That's a combination of paid parental leave, the deferred compensation match, people moving up the steps of their wage scale as they have longevity with the city, person X leaving, hiring person Y at a higher or a lower rate. So it's just an estimate of what we've seen in those kinds of costs. And then we've got the inflationary increase in our commodity services capital outlay. So when we talk about wanting to get to or accounting for $1 million lapse, if you look at the blue line at the bottom, if we were building a budget today, we would expect that surplus or deficit to be around $1 million, because we think ultimately out of this budget we'll end up saving $1 million somewhere. Couldn't put my finger on it today, but that's the expectation, is that we would save about $1 million in this budget. So using that $1 million lapse and looking at our expenditure budget, we use the tool that you all saw last year of figuring out what a mill rate should be. And the mill rate would need to be 10.28 based on property values increasing 2.5% in order to get a structurally balanced budget. There's a lot of assumptions built into that. The assessor's office is hard at work doing their job of assessing property values. When we get to our budget conversations starting in April, we'll know what those values are. So we needed to come up with an estimate of how we thought values were changing. The market doesn't seem to be dropping. It's certainly not growing, doesn't seem to be growing in our untrained eyes the way it has a couple years. So we went with a 2.5% property growth, just as a number for planning purposes and discussions of today. So this page embodies, just puts numbers to those assumptions. And I think as we head towards the retreat, what we're looking for answers to the questions. Manager Kester's put together some great questions that we will be looking for you to help guide us as we're working through. There are several other pages in the packet just showing the different types of revenue. how fund balances have changed over the year. I wasn't going to go through those page by page unless you have questions. So before I turn it over to Ms. Custer to wrap up, are there questions about the 25?
Ms. Hale?
Thank you, Madam Chair. It's kind of a statement, not a question. I just want to make sure that we all know and agree that when you say, in order to do this, we'd have a 10.28 mill rate. This assembly is not saying that we need a 10.28 mill rate. We had to fight really hard to get it lowered last year, and I just want to make sure that we're all on the same page. Make that statement. I do have a question. When we were talking earlier about, let's say that $1 million North Douglas Crossing match, I don't know about prior years if there was more of a mix. So if the prior year adopted budget was 184,000, were there one-time costs in that budget? And so are we making the wrong assumption by just taking that number and then, doing this changes that you've done, and then that results in 187?
Assemblymember Hale, there is some effort in every budget year to call out one-time expenditures, and we would be removing those from the starting place of FY25. So in preparing this particular document, we didn't go back and pick through every single departments. We kind of picked the big ones that were as part of the FY24 development. But certainly as we move forward into the 25 budget development, we're going to separate out those ongoing everyday operating expenses from the one-time to make sure that the budget that's presented to you as an ongoing operating budget is exactly that. And if there are one-time expenditures recommended, that you know what those are, as kind of, I don't want to say as two different buckets, but it's two different sections of what you would be approving as the budget.
Other questions? Ms. Kester?
Thank you, Chair. Well, my comments are really just to tee up for the retreat. So I want to make sure that the Assembly has finished update before I make those.
This is your chance, everybody. Any questions on any of these numbers or the assumptions? Mr. Smith?
Thank you, Madam Chair. Director Fick, you mentioned that the restricted budget reserve would be 1 million underfunded by $1 million. Sorry, what time was that? That's if we don't do any additional contributions in FY24 or in FY25. Sorry. When would that need to be increased to be, to meet the guidance and code, I think?
Assemblymember Smith, the FY24 restricted budget reserve is underfunded by $1 million.
Okay.
So ideally, we would transfer $1 million in FY24 to the restricted budget reserve.
Okay. Thank you.
Ms. Hughes Candies?
Thank you, Madam Chair. Just one question about if we're going to look at it, or if we're asking about assumptions as well. The other revenue growth is at a 2.5% estimation, and I swear I'm not obsessed with other revenue growth, even though that was my other question earlier. The reason I asked earlier is because it seemed like a real jump up, and Adrian, I'm so sorry, I forgot your last name. Miss Beagle. No, it says Wendell. Oh, Wendell, good, you're married. Oh, I'm so sorry. Congratulations again. I did know that. My very bad. Miss Wendell's explanation makes perfect sense why that one would be so large. But I'm just curious how this 2.5 fits into a historical, is that generally what we assume? Because are those things like little departmental grants? I know other grants or other departments are always applying for little grants. Is it that kind of stuff? Because it seems like we don't raise our prices every single year.
Right, so that's just a combination of adjustments as costs for running programs are increasing. We assume that departments would adjust their prices for the services that they're providing.
Follow up. And that is similar to what we assume every year.
Yes.
Thank you.
That brought up a related question for me. Not everyone has been through this process, but many of us have been through the process several times under Mr. Rogers' leadership. Are there assumptions here that are dramatically different than, I know the numbers might be different, but the approach that you've taken to the assumptions than what has been done the last few years?
Chair Wall, I don't believe so. We built these assumptions in concert, working with manager's office, working with rest of finance staff. And so I don't think there are any large differences in ideology or process represented here at all.
Thanks for that. Other question on these assumptions? All right, Ms. Kester, please tee us up for the retreat.
Thank you. I'm so excited, and we are very privileged to have the entire body's attention for a full 8 hours on Saturday. I think that these questions that Assemblymember Wall has posed and we'll be working through are going to be key for continuing this discussion. So I encourage you to chew on those. The packet that you have before you the packet for this weekend that's on your table should help support those questions, but so does the packet that you have for our Assembly Finance Committee today. So please bring this to the retreat with you. So because you may be like, for example, referring to the general government fund balance history and projections page when you talk about what level of general fund balance are we comfortable with, what do we want to spend it on, and some of those questions that are posed. So make sure you bring this packet in addition to the packet that you have before you to review. And a little bit about the packet, there's just a ton of great information in here, but we really want to have the retreat be conversational. I've worked a lot with the mayor on trying to keep it high level. So while the packet has a lot of good background, the discussion is going to be really interactive and won't be just like following the memos. So read the packet as background. If you only read the memos, if you all have been in government enough to know that we should write a memo to where you can get the basic information. And if you want to dive deeper, you can go down links and attachments. And of course, you can always ask us questions. So that's your guide to your retreat packet. I also wanted to let you know that we have invited department heads to participate for the morning part of the session. So they've been told that they can leave after 10 a.m. unless, of course, their topics are specifically on the agenda. So what you won't have this year is like department heads sitting behind you to ask questions while you're actually discussing your retreat goals. So I'm just saying that in case you need to reach out in advance to any particular department head with questions, to go ahead and do that. Now, some may stay because it's fascinating to listen to you all deliberate. And then I also just wanted to remind you that we are going to be really looking at the focus for this year, this retreat, again, high level, and then asking you to prioritize for the upcoming year. So maybe we want to do all the things for housing, but we're still going to try to bring it back around to, okay, what's the most important thing? What's the most important thing? So that's kind of just what I wanted to have you chew on as you digest this fabulous packet that we've all worked to put together for you. Any retreats, it's at the airport, 8:30 to 4:30. Parking.
I have reached out to the airport for any parking instructions they may have, and you'll get that via email tomorrow.
Feed you because hangry assembly members are no good, or staff, me especially. But any retreat questions?
Madam Mayor.
I have a question, but I'll just tag on to that. Just remember high level, and anything specific, we'll figure out what committee it should go to. I just want to talk briefly on the first thing. We're going to actually try something different this year, a little visioning session, and we're bringing in Mr. Holst to help us go through that. So just a little bit, we haven't I haven't figured out totally what it's going to be because I have to actually sit down and talk to the man. We've just talked over the phone several times, but think in your mind, where would you like to see Gino in the next 20 to 30 years? And then how do we get there? So those are kind of prep questions before we get there. And then you just have to convince everybody else so that your idea is the best. So anyway, that's all I have to say, other than remember high level as much as we can. It seems like a long day, but we're going to just barely touch on a couple topics.
Thanks, Mayor Weldon. Any questions on the retreat? All right. I'm excited to see you all bright and early and well prepared. I think that brings us to our next agenda item, unless anything else from staff? No. Okay. Next item is sales tax holiday. I'm not sure if this is Mr. Bryson or staff or Mr. Palmer. Who is leading? Mr. Bryson, I see you.
If it's me, okay. So you guys have heard me request a draft ordinance of what a potential sales tax holiday might potentially look like. And of course, Mr. Palmer's brilliance, he did it even better than what I was saying. This is not an ordinance to dictate February 29th to be the sales tax holiday. What this is an ordinance that could give the assembly another economic tool that future assemblies would have the power to create a sales tax holiday just through resolution, because we set the groundwork. So this ordinance is not actually to do sales tax holiday on February 29th, but to give us a legal mechanism that we could do it if we wanted to. It's a voluntary thing. So any business that felt like the sales tax collection, and I'm sorry, I'm talking, can I pass these out? Here's the draft copy. I also have an example of a sales tax blank form. I'll give you a copy of that. And then I have a hypothetical sales tax return to show you how simple the math would be for somebody to have a sales tax holiday exemption.
Mr. Bryson, I will give people a minute here to read the ordinance, recognizing that some people may need more time to digest, but maybe a good time to ask high-level questions. But I'll give people a little time to look at this.
Madam Chair, can I suggest maybe a brief ideas?
Yeah, 2 minutes.
Thank you.
The information, but certainly a good time to ask Mr. Bryson or staff any questions that this initial read brings up for you, or the general idea. Mr. Kelly and then Ms. Hale.
Thank you. I was just curious for on the second page, item number 3 in the list, looks like it's between lines 5 and 6. Sale of gasoline. I was just wondering why that was exempted from the sales tax holiday.
I might have to refer to one of our attorneys. There might be some legal reasons. State tax.
Mr.
Oh, good.
I don't think there's a few taxes we can get out of.
Yeah.
I think.
Mr. Palmer, do you have a additional answer to that question?
Yeah, thank you, Madam Chair. So the list 1 through 5, some of these items, and especially the fuel purchases, some of those items have associated taxes from other entities that would be really challenging to stop collecting on And then if you also think of the point of sale, for example, for gasoline, it could be really challenging to say you have to stop collecting tax at a pump if you're paying by card. So this was a model that I took from, I believe it was Ketchikan, and there could be some massaging if the body wants to massage it, but those are kind of some of the background reasons why some of these exceptions exist.
I have Miss Hale, then Miss Hughes Scandies, and Wahlagidak. Mayor. Good, Miss Hale.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Mr. Bryson, on the page that you filled in as an example, would you just envision this sales tax holiday to be under G, other exemptions, and you would just write in sales tax holiday or have a code for that, and that would be the amount that you would subtract?
Actually, Ms. Hale, I saw that it would either go on line A or line B. If it's a sale of goods, line 2A on the hypothetical. So the resale of goods, that's not tax. So whatever they sold on Tuesday.
Somehow that got attached to some of these.
That question was probably too detailed, sorry.
Can you make sure that one gets ripped off?
That's a blank one.
Okay.
Did that answer the question, Ms. Hale?
I think it was too detailed. I could talk to you about it later.
Miss Hughes Scandies.
Thank you, Madam Chair. So just the quick read is that you couldn't do more than no assembly would have a mechanism to do this more than twice a year, and no seller of goods is obligated to participate. The seller chooses. Okay.
It makes it completely voluntary. So if a business like a bar doesn't have maybe the most technologically advanced point of sale system, and it would be with the excise tax on the alcohol, it might be simpler for a bar to just say, no, we're not participating. But with many point of sale systems, it should be simple as just you turn it off, and then you would on line A, you would just write that day's tax or that day's sales.
Understood. And sorry, Mr. Palmer, I didn't see you were still sitting there. I would have directed that at you.
Wahlagidak.
Yeah, thank you, Madam Chair. Mr. Bryson, so this idea, just curious to know where it came from. Is it something that's been requested of our community? And it sounds like there was another community that already does this, and I'm just curious about the costs that are associated maybe with, it sounds like Ketchikan does this. I'm just curious about like what is the total number of 2 days a year for a sales tax holiday look like for Ketchikan?
I don't think that we have Ketchikan's sales tax holiday like sales numbers. As a business person, I know that promotion is a good way to get people spending money. I'd had this idea because I know that it's not just Ketchikan. Cities all over Southeast Alaska and all over the country have sales tax holidays from time to time. In Nashville, 10% sales tax. They do it right before back to school, or they do it for back to school. Just a really classic example that probably, with my family being from there, that's what put the idea in my mind. So we would absolutely not be breaking any new ground. Other Southeast cities absolutely have a sales tax. If we take our numbers of what we're looking at for sales tax for quarter 3, which is January, February, March, and break down the actuals, we could tease out that roughly a weekday in February, we could probably collect between $30,000 to $35,000 in sales tax on a given day. And I'm probably within $10,000 of being correct on that. It's somewhere in that ballpark if you just take what we did last year and figure out February is the shortest month. And the winter is the hardest time of the year in Juneau to be in business. I mean, the days are dark, it's just hard. And there's very few things that we could do as an assembly for a cost of $35,000, maybe I'm wrong, maybe it's $50,000, that could impact every single family in the community. a majority of the businesses in the community that do daily sales. And so I'm not reinventing the wheel. It just seemed like, again, the brilliance of this ordinance is it gives the Juneau Assembly, whichever assembly, another economic tool. And then if you guys want to do it on February 29th this year, as I've requested, great. If not, we can still make this a tool for future assemblies. We would still be leaving something for other assemblies.
I have Mayor Weldon, then Mr. Smith, and Ms. Atkinson.
So other Southeast communities don't have their big retailers that we have, and this would affect them the most. So have you talked to Home Depot and Costco and Fred Meyer to see how hard this would be for them to do?
Madam Mayor, I did not inquire with Fred Meyers because it was optional. So if a business or a national business said, hey, we're not going to participate in it, and knowing that I haven't, every time I mention it, everybody looks at me with blank eyes because we haven't tried it here, so nobody knows what the effect will be. And I've heard the excuse, well, just Fred Meyers and Costco will benefit. Well, if the largest retail employers in our community have a little bit better February than not, well, it's not the greatest outcome. It's still a better outcome than nothing. And if people are out shopping at Fred Meyer's then on that particular day and they're in a spending mode, then that just increases the likelihood that another sale would happen. You're right, Fred Meyer's, that's not what I'm thinking of. I'm thinking of the Juneau small businesses where selling something at the last day of February is the difference between a good month and a bad month.
Mr. Smith, then Ms. Atkinson, and Ms. Hale.
Thanks, Madam Chair. I have a lot of questions on this, but I guess my main one is, so could we by resolution, and this may be for the attorney, could we by resolution declare a sales tax holiday without this ordinance? Or what would be the mechanism to suspend sales tax for a day? Or do we need an ordinance to then allow us to do it by resolution?
Through the chair, thank you, Mr. Smith. So our current code does not authorize a sales tax holiday, and because it's in code, we would need an ordinance to then create the holiday rule, whatever the assembly decides if it chooses to. And one option would then be to follow up with a subsequent resolution identifying when that holiday is.
Ms. Atkinson.
Thank you. It seems like from the way this is structured, and this might be a question for the city manager, that a lot of the burden of the paperwork would be on the business owners themselves, but do we know or have any idea if this would increase the city staff burden when they're processing these sales tax return forms?
I'll field that question, Ms. Atkinson. There wouldn't be a large impact to staff. I mean, obviously, if the assembly wanted to have a sales tax holiday, I think one of the questions that we would get is how much sales tax did we not collect on that day? So we would need to make sure that we're tracking it. But that's, creating a code in our system and having a spot to put it. So the cost would be small.
Ms. Hale, then Mayor Weldon, and Mr. Kelly.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I have a couple questions. So, Mr. Bryson, I, as I have said before, I initially didn't like this idea, but I have definitely warmed to it. And I can see how it could be a kind of exciting day. But, for example, if somebody was planning on buying a car, they could wait until that day and buy the car, and they would save a ton of money. Is that right?
That is one of the main objections that people have raised. But as it was pointed out to me, when this happened in another Southeast city, the stores actually took advantage of that and brought in extra appliances. The response that I kind of give back is, yeah, maybe you were within a month and you could get a couple of people to wait. But if a person was without a car or just got like an insurance check or then go get a car, how often do people delay waiting to buy a car if they're going to actually buy a car from a dealership? Or when was the last time a person bought an appliance that your old appliance was still functioning. Most people wait till their appliance goes down. So while that might be a small advantage, and we might be able to help out a family that they were holding off because they couldn't really afford it, but now they get even just a 5% more discount on the dryer that was broke down. And so I would, it's going to generate more, no matter what, if you're correct in that, it's going to generate a high revenue day for a business when how many cars do they normally sell in February? So if the car dealership then has a better February than what they would have had, that's just going to lend to the strength of the economic viability of the businesses that are here all year long. No tourist business will be impacted by this. Well, not the resolution if we were to do that. Sorry.
Follow-up? So it also seems to me that the structure of this being that each assembly would do it by resolution, if that was a big problem, like everybody went out and bought, like 20 cars on that day, then we could figure it out the next year.
The way it's set up, Ms. Hale, if the assembly doesn't enact it by resolution, it just doesn't exist.
Got it.
So the next year, if no assembly member brought it forward, it just wouldn't be.
Thanks.
Mayor Weldon and then Mr. Kelly.
I'll disagree with you on the car versus the washing machine. That's a lot of sales tax on a car that we're giving up instead of a washing machine. There's people that buy cars out of state to not pay sales tax. My question is, how does this affect remote sales tax? I see that you have goods purchased on a sales tax holiday that are delivered on a different day, but there's lots of goods that are delivered on the same day that would affect remote sales tax.
Mr. Bryson or Mr. Palmer?
Madam Mayor, my understanding is they would be able to still use line 2A or 2B. Whatever you sold would go into the exempt category, and it would, so you have your total sales, that day's taxes or that day's sales are exempt. You do the math equation and you're left with what sales were taxable, provided that business didn't collect sales tax on that day. If they forgot that it was a sales tax holiday and collected them, they would just remit them.
As a retailer that, excuse me, through the chair, sorry, you nodded at me. So as a retailer that delivers out of town, it goes to the remote sales tax, which is Alaska Municipal League. So they would have to do it, not us. You're forgetting that. And line A is resale of goods. That's for wholesale. That would not be the exemptions. Item G would be an exemption. And as Ms. Flick said, she'd have to give a number for that.
Mr. Kelly?
My question could be for Mr. Palmer or for Mr. Bryson. I'm kind of curious about, an ordinance that we enact, it normally defaults to 30 days. A resolution could be instantaneous. How have other communities implemented this? Have they specified in the resolution this is effective on this day, or could it theoretically happen like, tomorrow's going to be a tax holiday? How would that work?
I can take that one as a start, and then Mr. Bryson can provide his vision. I know Ketchikan Gateway Borough has something similar to this. I think the vision that I understood from Mr. Bryson was, let's say the assembly were to adopt this ordinance, and then on a subsequent assembly meeting, maybe the night of public hearing on this one, if it's February 29th is the night or the day in which a sales tax holiday is intended, then you're right, a resolution could be adopted on the February meeting, and it would be effective immediately, so it would be ready to go for February 29th if that was the will of the assembly.
Bryson?
So I had a lot of notes here. I did a little bit of math as I went and did find our 23 actuals. I was slightly underestimated. I initially had predicted that we would do a sales tax holiday in the last weekend, a Saturday or Sunday. And I do recall that I used a little bit different math to come to that. It's about $100,000 if you take the $9.6 million of sales tax collected in Q3 of 2023 actuals, and I divided by the 92 days, and I got the 104,000 and change. So I apologize. At first I was wanting to do it on like a weekend day of it, and that's where I was getting the lower sales tax amounts. It's still February. It's still the end of the year. Oh, I did see that sales tax were a little bit higher than I thought it was going to be, and so I wanted to. It's not as cheap a deal as I thought, but I think the point would still be how many things could we do that could literally impact every family in Juneau for $100,000.
Ms. Hughes Candies.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Just want to point out that if that doesn't change consumers' behavior and we'd be affecting Juneau residents who have discretionary spending power to take advantage of that, which is not every resident.
Seeing no more immediate questions, I know we just saw this. My recommendation would be we keep it in committee so people can continue to collect information and think about this. But I would say, if you have asks of things that you'd like staff to look at or analyze to help decide where this is going, then now would be a good time to voice that.
Madam Chair.
Mr. Bryson.
Thank you, Madam Chair. While I'm absolutely, I really appreciate the committee having this discussion. If we could allow it to be introduced at the next assembly meeting and then still brought back for finance conversation, it would keep it on track. Ideally we're creating an ordinance to give the assembly this tool of this, with it being the leap year day that just doesn't exist the rest of the time. That's why I thought if we did it timely on that one day, then if it has a negative impact and we do have some negative fallout, the day just doesn't exist the next year. So if we could at least introduce it at this next coming assembly and have time to talk about it again at another finance meeting, we could still keep it on track for this year if this body was agreeable to that.
Like to make a motion and then the committee can discuss it.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I move ordinance serial number 20, a draft ordinance establishing authority for sales tax holiday for introduction at the next assembly meeting, and ask for unanimous consent.
Ms. Hughes Candies and Mr. Smith.
Thanks, Madam Chair. I'm going to object to that. I don't know how much conversation you guys had at the last assembly meeting when I wasn't here. I understand you spoke with the body then and asked if they were supportive of bringing this to finance. I have to object just from my perspective. I just got handed this and I had 2 minutes to read it, and I have tons of questions for staff, and I'm sure they'll continue to bubble up. I understand the motion is to keep it in committee, but keep it moving on this track, and I just think that's poor policy for us to, wing something at each other and then keep it on track. I do understand, though, Mr. Bryson, your reasons, so I'm sensitive to where you're coming from, but I'll just leave it at that. There's a lot of modeling that, to the extent that they could model, that I'd like to see from the finance office, and I'd like to examine other fiscal policy on this. I've seen some that makes me not wild about this idea, but I'll just leave it at that.
Mr. Smith.
Similar comments to Ms. Hughes Candies. Thank you, Madam Chair.
And then Mayor Weldon.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I support Mr. Bryson's motion. I think that by introducing it, we would have and then bringing it back to committee, we would have the ability to discuss it further and have those questions answered. I also, the thing that I like the most about this is the gesture of support that it is for our businesses and for the residents of our community, and even those that don't have discretionary income for discretionary spending. They go to the grocery store. So I think that there is a lot of positive that could come from this, and a lot of I think it demonstrates that the Assembly is thinking of the community and the business community.
Mayor Weldon.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Ms. Hale, I appreciate the gesture also. However, in my day job, I do run a retail store, and I am the person in charge of collecting this or submitting the sales tax. Just did it today, so I wasn't late. Anyway, so just in a normal course of the day, how this would affect me. I'd have to keep track of the day, of the sales of the day. I'd have to keep track of how many sales went out of town, and that for the remote sales tax, and I'd have to keep track of the things that were purchased that day, because we have accounts that they wouldn't get their parts till a week or two on the barge. So my question would be to staff, if we really want to look into this, to get hold of the major retailers and see how this would affect them.
Mr. Smith.
No, actually, I would like to say something. I guess I'm just not sold on this policy call. We're losing revenue. I think there's a question of income and people and the timing of people with certain income's ability to shift their behavior. I think we lose significantly more in revenue than just an average day. Anyway, I feel like maybe our energy should be focused on actual sales tax, like potential like reform or equity or something. I just feel like this is just perpetuating kind of a regressive sales tax issue that we have. And I mean, anyway, I have a lot of issues with it. Anyway, I have more questions, and I prefer not to let the horse out of the barn until we really thought about it more. Thanks.
Mr. Bryson.
Thank you very much for the last opportunity to speak. And actually, Mr. Smith, that was probably one of the motivating factors why I think that we should do a one day. We've tried to look at sales tax. We've tried to remove sales tax from food. Sales tax is absolutely the most regressive form of taxation. We could give a win, a victory to the entire community for a significantly small amount compared to the numbers that we're talking about here. We've had sales tax growth, significant growth after the year before. This shot in the arm to the local business community, every way that you guys have kind of described it, in the end result, the business is the one that really got the extra sales. Our business community being strong is going to lead to better sales tax in the future. We want our business community strong. They're the ones that are continuing to grow the sales tax. Thank you for the time, Madam Chair.
Thank you, Mr. Bryson. I'll speak. I'll object to this motion. I'm interested in continuing to explore this topic, but I think by introducing it, we're putting out into the public in a form that's not going to get all the questions that we're just starting to think through. So sounds like, so I'd support keeping committee if this fails, but others may not feel differently. So let's call roll. Ms. Wendell.
Thank you, Chair Wall. On the motion to move draft ordinance 2023-XX and ordinance establishing authority for a sales tax holiday to the full assembly for introduction and discuss it at a future finance committee meeting. Assemblymember Bryson.
Yes.
Assemblymember Hughes Candies.
No.
Assemblymember Wachlal Gadak.
No.
Assemblymember Hale.
Yes.
Assemblymember Atkinson.
No.
Assemblymember Kelly.
No.
Assemblymember Smith.
No.
Mayor Walden. No. Chair Wall.
No.
Motion fails, 2 ayes, 7 nays.
So I think now the question for the body is, do we want to keep it in committee and continue to work on it? Or it sounded like some people, don't maybe not want to spend the time. So Mayor Weldon.
I'll make that motion. Just keep it in Finance Committee.
Any objections to the motion to keep it in the committee? Wahagidak.
Just have a parliamentary question. Because we combined those two in the previous motion, does that impact the ability for us to make this motion now?
Through the chair, thank you, Wahagidak. No, it can be a separate motion, and because you could bifurcate either one.
All right, we have a motion. I didn't see any objections to keeping it in committee. All right. Moving on then. That brings us to agenda topic E, or item E, and I think Ms. Wendell, you have something.
Thank you, Chair Wall. I just wanted to note for folks on the Zoom meeting and folks in the room that once the assembly goes into executive session, the Zoom portion and recording of the meeting will be ended and the meeting end time will be noted in the meeting minutes. Thank you.
Do we have a motion to move the assembly into executive session? Mayor Weldon.
I move the assembly into the executive session to discuss matters that immediate knowledge of which could have an adverse effect on city finances, specifically an update on collection bargaining.
Any objections? So moved.